Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak, your podcast available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday, the 20th of January here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Donald Trump plans to declare a US energy emergency and sign dozens of executive orders after today's inauguration.
Hamas begins to release hostages from Gaza in exchange for Palestinians held in Israeli prisons as a fragile ceasefire goes into effect.
Plus, more than just a trim. Research finds hedge funds have kept more than half the $3.7 trillion their investments generate.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
US President-elect Donald Trump says he will sign close to 100 executive orders within hours of taking office later today. The incoming president spoke of his plans at a pre-inauguration dinner attended by his biggest financial backers, political allies and business leaders, including Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Trump also held a rally at an arena in Washington, D.C., where he set out what he hopes to achieve in his second term.
Together, we're going to cut your taxes, end inflation, slash your prices, getting them back down, raise your wages, and bring thousands of factories back to the USA, right where they belong, and that'll be done through tariffs and smart policy. We will build American, we will buy American, and we will hire American.
Trump also promised to end the, quote, reign of a failed and corrupt political establishment in Washington. The events in the city offered Trump a victory lap in a place he left 4 years ago after his supporters rioted at the US Capitol in a failed bid to keep him in power. We'll have live coverage of the inauguration here on Bloomberg throughout the day, with President-elect Donald Trump taking the oath of office at midday US East Coast time. That's 5 p.m. here in London.
Well, Bloomberg understands that the first focus for President-elect Donald Trump is a plan to declare a national energy emergency. Sources say the move will allow the administration to unleash domestic energy production, reversing President Joe Biden's actions to combat climate change. According to a report from the Brennan Center for Justice, declaring a national emergency allows a president to tap into as many as 150 special powers, normally intended to address hurricanes, terrorist attacks and other unforeseen events.
Donald Trump has pledged to delay the enforcement of a national security law that threatened to ban TikTok, but it remains unclear whether the app's Chinese parent company ByteDance is able or willing to secure a US backer in time to avoid a permanent shutdown. Our chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel says the president-elect's plan is not without controversy.
We've heard from the House Speaker, we've heard from the Senate Intelligence Head, all saying that it's not legal necessarily for Donald Trump to extend this by 90 days. But that reprieve has a lot of caveats. That 90 days, he must go to Congress and essentially get the extension certified. He needs to show to Congress that there is a justified process already in place.
Bloomberg's Stephen Engel speaking there. A ban on the social media platform kicked in over the weekend before service was restored, following Trump's promise to sign an executive order granting another 90 days for TikTok. How Beijing and ByteDance respond could have implications not just for the world's most popular social video service, but also Chinese companies from Temu to Alibaba with thriving American operations.
To other news now. Hamas has released 3 Gaza hostages in exchange for 90 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. The swap came after the start of a temporary ceasefire between the two sides. In all, 33 hostages and close to 1,000 prisoners are expected to be freed over the next 6 weeks, with talks to be held on securing a second phase of the ceasefire. Outgoing US President Joe Biden says that it will be up to Donald Trump's new administration to maintain the ceasefire in Gaza.
Today's ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages is a result of a principled and effective policy that we presided over for months. And we got here without a wider war in the Middle East than many predicted. And now it falls on the next administration to help implement this deal.
Biden and Trump have both taken credit for the deal, with the president-elect's Middle East envoy, Stephen Witkoff, also involved in the final negotiations. According to the health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza, more than 46,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel's military campaign. The war was triggered in October of 2023 when Hamas attacked southern Israel, killing more than 1,200 people and taking hundreds more as hostages.
Hedge funds have long been regarded as notoriously expensive. Now new research is revealing just how costly they are for their clients. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
Of the $3.7 trillion in profits they earned as an industry since 1969, nearly half, or a staggering $1.8 trillion, was gobbled up as fees. That's according to estimates by LCH Investments, a fund of hedge funds. With soaring assets, firms have raised their charges to more than 50% of gains, up from the roughly 30% they earned until the early 2000s. The industry's high fees have been criticised by investors like Warren Buffett and Bill Gross, who call them unbelievable and a giant rip-off. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
UK lawmakers have raised doubts about the Chancellor's plan to cut down on wasteful spending. MPs on the Treasury Committee are warning that the Office for Value for Money, a new unit chaired by David Goldstone, is understaffed with a vague remit and no clear plan to achieve its mandate. Ahead of the multi-year spending assessment, Rachel Reeves says that departments would be asked to find efficiency savings within government spending of 5%. The review will set departments' budgets for 2026 onwards, and it is expected to conclude in June.
Those are your top stories. On the markets, equities powered into the close on Friday on Wall Street, led by big tech. The Nasdaq finishing up 1.7%. The S&P 500 1% higher after those reports that Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping of China had spoken. The S&P 500 actually had its best week since the election. Treasuries yields moved modestly higher today. We're seeing another 1.5 basis points higher on the 10-year, 4.63%. In Asian trading today, that optimism continues. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index up by 1%. The Hang Seng's 2.1% higher, with the CSI 300 up by 0.5%. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index 0.2 weaker this morning. The euro is trading just above 103 against the dollar.
Now, in a moment, we'll discuss Donald Trump's plans for his first executive orders. Plus, we'll bring you more on the ceasefire in Gaza that has been taking effect yesterday and today. But before that, the World Economic Forum begins in Davos today. And of course, we're going to bring you our interviews with political leaders, business leaders across Bloomberg in the next few days. A couple of really great articles on the Bloomberg terminal and on our website. One about how CEOs at Davos are preparing for the return of Donald Trump and how they're embracing him this time much more enthusiastically than they did 8 years ago.
Yeah, and there's a question of principles here of how much these CEOs are going to stick to the ideals that perhaps are cherished at Davos, measures around combating climate change or limiting the effects of climate change. The headline of this piece, "Were You Lying?" says it all to how CEOs are considering their positions. But the other piece that I've been reading about Davos is from our Bloomberg Pursuits reporter Ed Stapley about what people really want to know about the parties in Davos during the week, when of course you have so many of the rich and powerful gathering there. He has some great inside stories from experiences over the years, including one when he ended up in a party with Jason Derulo. I don't know how he got into that, quite frankly.
Sounds great.
But so there's some top tips there as well for those who are in Davos this week. Places to eat, places to go.
Yes.
The piano bar is mentioned. For anyone who's a regular of Davos knows that you can't go to Davos and not end up at some point in the piano bar.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of parties and celebrations, President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance will be sworn into office by the US Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts today in Washington, D.C., following a weekend of festivities and rallies stateside. Trump's first term, of course, ended in 2021 with him as a pariah to many in his own political party after his supporters rioted at the US Capitol in a failed bid to keep him in power. Now Donald Trump returns. Joining us now, Bloomberg's EMEA News Director Rosalind Matheson. The inauguration is taking place indoors this time round, the start of Donald Trump's second term.
Well, that's right, but it's not going to deter him. As you said, I mean, we saw this effusive rally yesterday in Washington, and then a candlelight dinner hobnobbing with, not just Elon Musk, but Jeff Bezos, talking to Tim Cook on the phone. I mean, it's really kind of a campaign-style moment, if anything, not someone coming into office. And certainly the tone was very much like that. And so even though the inauguration today has to be held indoors due to the very, very cold weather, that's the first time in decades, there's a real sense of difference, as you were noting. Like the last time Donald Trump, had this moment, he was, having lost office in a failed attempt to, his critics say, to overturn the election result, now being welcomed back to Washington in this very, very kind of rah-rah sort of rally yesterday. And certainly we're going to see more of that festivities today. There's going to be a parade within an arena, essentially. And we know from Donald Trump's speech yesterday that he's probably going to talk for a little while. So prepare yourselves for that, because he doesn't like to give short speeches. And so there'll be more of, what he said yesterday in his comments today. There'll be more pledges to come out of the gate fast. And certainly that's very much what he's going to be doing.
We've been talking too about some of the comments he's made about the 100 executive orders that he's promising, and in particular we're interested in the measures that he could announce for the energy sector.
Well, that's right. So we know there's going to be dozens and dozens of executive orders announced, ranging over everything from immigration. That's going to be a big focus from day one. And as you were saying, a report that we've had that he's going to declare an emergency over energy. Exactly what the emergency is unclear. Those declarations are normally for natural disasters, for terrible things like, terrorist attacks and so on. So what exactly does that mean? And what does that enable him to do? He's probably also going to declare an emergency over the border with Mexico in turn. What it does show is just he's going to try very quickly to bring back some of his old policies and also unwind the legacy of the Joe Biden administration. On the energy side, that's really about encouraging fossil fuels and allowing drilling again in certain areas of federal land, for example, pushing against the Biden agenda on that front.
That may be a domestic policy, but abroad, everyone's watching, which of their leaders get to go to the inauguration, because that seems enormously important. People like Italy's Giorgia Meloni, also Chinese Vice President Han Zheng meeting Elon Musk.
Well, that's right. And Han Zheng didn't just meet with Elon Musk, he met with J.D. Vance. So very, very busy there also. And the optics of who gets the invite, who actually accepts the invite, who turns up is interesting. You can certainly see there are some far-right politicians, not just Giorgia Meloni, who are going to be turning up at inauguration today. And the sense that you've got big business falling into line with Donald Trump very much. You've got certain leaders falling into line and certainly at least trying to mitigate what might be coming at them on the tariffs front, because we know that Donald Trump is going to use tariffs as a political tool, whether you are a friend or whether you are a foe. If he thinks the US is at a disadvantage, he's going to put those things on. So what you can see is leaders, they'll be wanting to get in his ear very early in the piece, perhaps even on inauguration day, to sort of talk about what they can do in turn to mitigate what might be coming.
OK, Rosla Matson, our MEA News Director, thank you very much for joining us.
Now, it's the first day of a 6-week ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. 3 hostages were released on Sunday in exchange for 90 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. Joining us now is Bloomberg's reporter in Jerusalem, Dan Williams. Good morning, Dan. Firstly, what has been the reaction then to the development, the ceasefire and the release of hostages and some prisoners?
Relief, joy on both sides. There was a last-minute hold-up on the implementation, which was meant to have happened exactly 24 hours ago. There was a delay of some 2 hours and 45 minutes after Hamas did not deliver, as expected, the list of those 3 women hostages who were to go free and who did go free later in the day. Israel signaled a no-tolerance policy to any sort of hold-up. There's really no love lost between these groups. The hostilities remain, and this deal was indeed mediated by foreign powers because they don't talk directly. So there's deep suspicion, and there was continued Israeli military activity with a number of deaths in the Gaza Strip. So after that delay, the deal got implemented, and now it appears to be holding. The next batch of releases is due this coming weekend. So for now, I imagine families, friends on both sides are enjoying the reunion with their loved ones, and Israel is looking ahead to see whether this deal can be implemented in full and not just its first phase, which is in itself tentative, a 6-week-long first phase.
What's the situation in Gaza now? What will change with this ceasefire in place?
Well, Gazans will get a respite from more than 15 months of war. There is a significant increase in humanitarian aid coming in. And I think all eyes will be looking toward the south, Gaza's border with Egypt, which we're hearing, although this is being kept very close, almost a guarded secret by the officials involved, that the border between Gaza and Egypt will open. That would be Gazans' other access, or really only access to the outside world without direct Israeli involvement. And the question is how those arrangements can be in place, given that Israel has demanded that Hamas would not have control of borders where it has previously smuggled in weaponry. So there will probably be some kind of arrangement with the Egyptians, potentially with the Palestinian Authority, that's the internationally backed Palestinian administration, which is based in the West Bank, potentially European administrators, and there's a report about an American security company. So a lot of moving parts coming together slowly, but nonetheless, it appears that this very complicated deal is working for now.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.